At the end of her days, Queen Maria's body gave off an unbearable odor, even when locked in the palace chambers. Her swollen belly pulsed as if something alive was inside, and it is said that worms were already feeding on her flesh even before death claimed her name. Her skin, once pale and regal, had become gray and scaly. Her face, deformed by pain and fever, was a mirror of her ruined soul. On her deathbed, she raved about the voices of the damned and saw the hell she had created for herself. The queen, who had imagined herself the savior of the English throne, was slowly dying, rotting away while still alive, as if consumed by her own fanaticism. To understand the horror of this end, we must return to the childhood of the princess who was once the sunshine of the Tudor court. Daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Mary was born with promises of glory. Intelligent, fluent in several languages, and educated in the arts and letters, she was raised to shine and to obey. From an early age, she learned that her Catholic faith was not only devotion, but destiny. When her father broke with Rome and married Anne Boleyn, Mary's world collapsed. Humiliated, separated from her mother, deprived of her title of princess, she began to carry an invisible wound in her heart. The pain of a betrayed daughter, the fury of a righteous soul cast into the shadows. This trauma would shape her entire existence. Instead of healing, Mary hardened. She kept her pain as a sacred trophy, transforming it into an ideal of national redemption. For years, she lived as a hostage within her own castles, surrounded by spies, denied as heir, feeding her desire to restore the true faith and recover what had been taken from her. When she finally ascended the throne, after the death of her brother Edward and the deposition of Queen Jane Grey, Mary was no longer the virtuous young woman she once was. She was a woman shaped by rejection and fear, dressed in the armor of religious rigidity. The England she found was a battlefield of beliefs, marked by silent wars between Protestants and Catholics. And instead of appeasing, Mary chose to punish. Catherine's daughter became the bloody queen, burning hundreds in public squares, believing she was saving souls with the fire of purification. But each pyre she lit also set her own spirit ablaze. Her health began to deteriorate, as if her body were responding to the torments she inflicted on others. Miscarriages, false pregnancies, mysterious bleeding, and a deep sadness took over her private life, like a curse whispered by the dead.
It wasn't just her flesh that was rotting. It was her throne, her crown, the promise of her childhood. Marie fought against external enemies, but what devoured her came from within. Pride cloaked in faith, a soul incapable of forgiveness, and a desperate need to be recognized as righteous. Her obsession with Catholic unity became a mirror of her own internal division. In the end, not even the church she defended so fiercely wanted her alive. The woman who sought redemption was swallowed by the same flame she had lit in others. This is the story of a queen who lost herself between faith and madness, between heritage and despair. A story that smells of blood, incense, and rot. If you want to hear more real stories that seem straight out of ancient tragedies, subscribe to the channel and comment below. Do you believe that Mary was a victim of her time or the creator of her own hell? Mary grew up in the thick silence of humiliation. After her parents' marriage was annulled, she found herself reduced to a servant in the house of her newborn half-sister, Elizabeth, the fruit of her father's union with Anne Boleyn. The girl who had been treated like a princess now cleaned the court silverware with trembling hands and deep dark circles under her eyes. Her wounded dignity sprouted in her chest like a buried thorn, and faith became her only refuge amid the dishonor. In this childhood violated by abandonment, a queen hardened by the denial of love germinated. The death of her mother, Catherine, in seclusion, was like a lead seal on her heart. Mary never forgave her father. The injustice she witnessed was not forgotten, but sanctified. The pain did not break her, it petrified her. She began to dress like a perpetual widow, even in the prime of her youth. She abandoned colors, laughter, and dreams of love. She guarded her chastity like a sword, not for purity, but for control. Each day without affection was a candle lit in memory of her dead mother and a promise of future reparation.
When Henry VIII died, and then Edward VI, Mary saw a chance to restore what had been denied her. The people, tired of abrupt changes, acclaimed her name. In 1553, she became the first reigning queen of England. It was the triumph of the rejected daughter. But behind the red curtains of the throne, a heart too wounded to rule with mercy beat. There was no forgiveness in her eyes, only a thirst for relentless justice, which confused revenge with redemption. The early days of her reign were full of hope. She restored the Latin Mass, reconnected England to Rome, and promised a return to the old order. But the country's roots were already mixed with Protestantism. When she demanded religious unity, she did not do so with words. She did so with fire. In Oxford, Ridley and Latimer were burned alive. Their screams echoed like bells of agony throughout England. The smell of roasted flesh began to permeate the reign of the queen who claimed to save souls. With each execution, Mary seemed to sink deeper into her inner abyss. The faith that had once been her comfort became a blade. She believed she was purifying the kingdom, but what she was purging was her own ancient pain. She did not engage in dialogue with her opponents. She saw them as condemned heretics. The woman who had been wronged in her youth now became the perpetrator of the same injustice. The wheel of pain spun with her at its center, disguised as a saint. Amid iron politics, Mary decided to marry Philip II of Spain. The marriage, sealed in 1554, was seen as a strategic union. But behind the politics, there was an almost childlike hope, the desire for love, for continuity, for an heir. However, Philip never loved her. He was cold, absent, almost ghostly. Once again, Maria felt used, left out, just like in her childhood. A few months after the wedding, her belly began to swell. The court whispered, "The queen is pregnant." The entire nation prayed for a prince. But the months passed and nothing was born. Doctors probed, midwives waited. Her belly swelled, but it was emptiness that grew. There was no child. There was pus. There was gas. There was a hidden ulcer in her uterus, perhaps symbolic, perhaps literal. It was her body announcing the falseness of hope. Joy turned to shame.
The mother of the future was once again the daughter of absence. Deep down, Maria began to fall apart. She no longer dreamed of dawn, only of condemnation. Her hands trembled. Her eyes sank into dark circles of exhausted faith. The queen who had promised to be a restorer was increasingly becoming a living ghost, a body lacking a soul that had confused love with punishment. The false pregnancy was not just an isolated event. It was the symbolic image of the internal ruin that was already spreading like a silent poison. Maria tried to believe it was a divine trial. She withdrew into more intense prayers, extreme fasting, penances that bordered on martyrdom. But not even God answered. The sky, once her consolation, had become a mirror of silence and abandonment. The queen was plunged into such deep loneliness that not even the cries of her advisors could reach her. Philip, who already showed little interest, left the country to fight for his own empires. Maria wrote letters that were never answered. The heart of England beat far away, indifferent to the torment of her sovereign. Her husband's absence rekindled in Mary the old pain of her father's abandonment, and everything that had not been resolved came back to haunt her. She no longer ruled. She reacted like a wounded child, trying to control a world she did not understand. And then, as if fate were mocking her faith, a new pregnancy was announced. The queen believed it. The people doubted it.
Once again, her womb grew. Once again, hope swelled. And once again, it was all in vain. The medicine of the time could do nothing. The only certainty was decay. Her flesh filled with strange fluids. Her kidneys failed. Her blood darkened. The doctors spoke of dropsy, but the people whispered curses. As her body slowly rotted away, Maria ordered new executions. She wanted to silence doubts about her legitimacy. With each bonfire lit, she seemed to try to convince the world and herself that she was still queen, still chosen, still loved by God. But the cries of the heretics burned louder than her prayers. Her public image deteriorated. The people, who had once welcomed her with flowers, now feared her. And that fear was the harbinger of her final abandonment. In 1557, a piece of news destroyed what remained of her hope. Philip II had asked for the hand of her niece, Elizabeth of Valois. The Queen of England was officially discarded. She was no longer desired, either politically or physically. The emptiness that had once been concentrated in her womb now spread to her heart, her eyes, her skin. Maria began to waste away at an alarming rate. Constant pain in her limbs, uncontrollable vaginal bleeding, fevers, delirium. The palace was overcome by a putrid, almost unbearable smell. Curtains were changed frequently. Servants fainted.
And yet the queen ordered religious rituals, still trying to control her fate with masses, relics, exorcisms. She did not want to die. She wanted to be born again, as a mother, as a martyr, as a symbol. But the world would not give her that gift. Her mind was fragmenting. She talked to shadows. She sent messages to her absent husband as if he was still by her side. She saw her mother in the mirror. The palace had become a theater of whispering horrors, and she was the tragic character who refused to leave the stage, even when the audience had already forgotten her. The faith that sustained her was now a prison. The body that had crowned her was now a decomposing tomb. The people already looked to Elizabeth as the true heir, young, Protestant, beautiful, the opposite of the dying queen. England, without declaring rebellion, had already turned the page, and Mary, in her bed of pain, remained as an uncomfortable memory. Catherine's daughter died the same way she lived, alone, rejected, faithful to a God who never answered her. The Queen could no longer rise from her bed. Her body seemed to sink slowly into her own entrails, as if her bones were surrendering to the weight of an exhausted soul. Doctors applied poultices to try to contain the edema that disfigured her legs. Her gums bled at the slightest touch. The skin on her belly stretched into hot blisters, as if the flesh were trying to expel what was rotting inside her. Pus dripped silently through the sheets, and the horrified servants wiped her with cloths soaked in vinegar to mask the odor of the dying queen. And yet, amid the decay, Mary continued to rule, or at least to believe that she still did. With a trembling hand, she signed arrest warrants. She ordered national fasts. She demanded the presence of priests in uninterrupted shifts, as if faith, hammered night and day, could silence the verdict of the flesh. But the heavens remained silent. The sanctity she had sought so hard was turning before everyone's eyes into a grotesque penance. The woman who wanted to be a saint now lay as an unwitting martyr to her own obsession.
Her public image, already shattered, became untenable. In London, clandestine pamphlets multiplied, calling her Mary the Mad. In taverns it was said that the Queen was no longer human, but a breathing corpse. Some said that rats roamed the palace corridors, attracted by the stench. Others claimed that her womb had given birth to a demon, not an heir. The figure of the Queen dissolved into the grotesque legends she herself inspired. In her delirium, Maria called for Philip, for her dead mother, for God. She spoke to the wall. She touched her womb as if she could still feel the life that had never been there. She was a queen without a people, a wife without a husband, a woman without children. Everything that had sustained her, faith, duty, blood, had abandoned her. All that remained was her rotting body, the ultimate symbol of her failure. The punishment came from within, as if God had responded late and brutally. Even so, until her last moments, she refused to entertain any doubts. She forbade anyone from mentioning Elizabeth as heir. She swore she would live to give birth to the promised heir. Denial was her last form of control. But not even her most loyal advisors could sustain this illusion. The crown was already being molded for another head, and Mary, on her bed of pain, still ordered prayers, still hoped for a miracle that existed only in her feverish mind. In this scenario, England no longer viewed its queen with reverence, but with pity. The nobles avoided visiting her. The servants, once numerous, now took turns in short shifts, with cloths over their faces and their eyes downcast. St. James's Palace had been transformed into a living mausoleum, where each breath of the sovereign was a sob about to cease. It was as if the very architecture of the throne trembled under the weight of imminent death. Maria no longer recognized day from night. The chapel bells caused her spasms. Her body burned with fever and cold at the same time. Her nails darkened. Her once vibrant eyes became dull and watery, and yet her mouth whispered prayers. She did not beg for healing, but for justification. She wanted to die a martyr. She wanted her pain to be proof of her sanctity, but even that the people would not grant her. All that remained was the collective silence that awaited her last breath. England, with its green fields and cold churches, no longer knelt for Mary. The land seemed to sigh with relief at her slow departure. And so, at the center of her own empire, Mary Tudor became an island of putrid flesh, forgotten and ignored, where once there had lived a dreamy girl who only wanted to be a daughter again. The tragedy was complete. Only her last breath remained. On the morning of November 17, 1558, Mary's body stopped. There were no cries, no trumpets, no prayers, only the muffled sound of breath that was gone. The Queen died wrapped in linen, damp with sweat and pus. Her skin had broken in places. A dark liquid ran down her back, staining the royal sheets. The doctors confirmed her death in silence. There was no need to say it. The stench in the room already announced that life had long since fled. And then, like a cloak suddenly removed, England breathed again. The bells rang, not in mourning, but in relief. Mary's legacy would be horror, blood, and failure. Her reign had lasted only 5 years, but it had left deep scars. Protestants would call her a tyrant.
The Catholics, fanatical. History, Bloody Mary. A nickname that immortalized her desire for salvation through pain. But it also revealed the cruel irony of her journey. The more she tried to purify, the more she was seen as impure. Her body was hastily embalmed, but decomposition had already set in. During the funeral, the smell still escaped through the cracks in the coffin. The nobility wore perfumed handkerchiefs. The mass was short and cold. There was no real mourning. The crowd just wanted a new dawn. Elizabeth, her half-sister, was crowned a few days later. Young, Protestant, modern. Mary's shadow quickly disappeared under the splendor of a new era. It was as if her existence had been a necessary mistake, a nightmare between two bright days. But Mary's tragedy does not lie solely in her physical end. It lies in her torn soul, in the child who never healed from rejection, in the woman who confused faith with punishment, love with obedience, power with control. She did not rule England, she tried to take revenge on it, and in doing so, she destroyed herself. Her story is a mirror for all souls who have failed to distinguish justice from resentment, loyalty from fanaticism. Historians still debate the illnesses that afflicted her: uterine cancer, kidney tuberculosis, liver failure. But perhaps her true illness was not medical but moral, an evil that began in childhood, in the silence of abandonment, and grew like a tumor of disfigured faith. She died without children, without a people, without forgiveness, and her name echoes to this day as a warning. The human heart, when not healed, can turn a throne into a tomb.
The Queen who rotted away in life became a symbol of an England that wanted to forget. But it is impossible to forget the smell of burning flesh, the cries of the martyrs, the dark corridors of St. James infested with despair. Mary wanted to save the body of the nation. In the end, it was her own body that witnessed its ruin. A queen who wanted to be a saint and ended up a specter. And so ends the unfolding of this tragedy. A portrait of power without tenderness, of faith without mercy, of pain without redemption. If this story moved you, if it touched something in your memory or in your heart, subscribe to the channel and share this video. May Mary's story serve not only as a lament, but as an eternal warning. In those last days, Maria's mind wandered between times.
She called for her dead mother, her lost childhood, her cruel father. In her delirium, she murmured the names of those burned alive. She said she didn't want to see them, that she didn't know it hurt so much. Perhaps there, among the sheets stained with blood and secretions, she realized that her justice was only a mirror of her own pain, that each charred heretic was a reflection of the abandonment she had suffered and which she could not name. Her body, now purple and swollen, seemed about to explode. Ulcers had multiplied across her back and abdomen. The sheets stuck to her open flesh. The stench in the room could no longer be masked with incense. It was an acidic, penetrating stench of condemned flesh. The servants wept, not out of love, but out of horror. The queen rotted slowly, as if time itself denied her a quick end. It was as if the earth refused to take her back. In her moments of lucidity, Maria asked for forgiveness, not to God, but to the people. She asked them to pray for her, not so that she might enter heaven, but so that she would not be forgotten as a monster. She said she wanted to be remembered as Catherine's daughter, not as the bloody one. But even she no longer believed that. Her name was already written on the pyres. Her soul was branded with iron by the invisible hands of her victims. A few hours before she died, a confessor visited her. She could barely speak. She touched the cross with stiff fingers, but did not kiss it. She just looked at it, as if she saw there not salvation, but a mirror. The cross, symbol of sacrifice and redemption, now seemed a reminder that she only knew how to inflict pain, not to welcome. Mary died in silence, without a miracle, without a halo. Her breathing ceased like that of an animal too tired to fight.
She was buried in Westminster Abbey, in a tomb shared with her sister Elizabeth, who ironically replaced her as a symbol of a new era. There, side by side, lie two queens divided by beliefs and united by blood and tragedy. Elizabeth would be remembered as the great, Mary as the bloody. Time, master of all narratives, would choose which memory would be acclaimed and which would be buried with shame. But there is something that history cannot erase: the loneliness of the human soul. Mary was victim and executioner, saint and tormentor, woman and spectre. Her tragedy was not knowing how to transform pain into compassion. She wanted to purify the world without first healing herself. The body that swelled with empty promises was the same one that rotted away without a legacy. And each open wound was a word that was never spoken: forgiveness. Her ruin invites us to reflect. How many times do we cling to ideals so as not to face our most intimate wounds? How many times do we burn others for what we cannot accept in ourselves? Mary is the extreme portrait of a soul that confused faith with control, devotion with punishment, and her slow, fetid, and isolated death is the final echo of choices that were never born of love.
The Queen's fate leaves us with a question that spans the centuries. What lies at the center of power when love is removed? What remains of a throne built on fear and penance? Nothing. Only the silence of cold walls, the smell of open flesh, the shadow of a woman who begged to be heard when it was already too late. Mary I did not die of heresy or illness. She died of wounded pride, distorted faith, and unresolved absence. Her body is the ultimate metaphor for her soul, a reliquary closed over emptiness, a sanctuary that sheltered pain and exuded punishment. And in the end, not even God descended to her bedside, because love does not dwell where only guilt remains. And now that her story has been told, not as a legend but as a mirror, it is up to us to look inside. How many Marys live in silence on our own internal thrones? How many bodies rot because they cannot name their pain? May the end of this queen serve as a warning, for destiny always returns in flesh what the spirit refused to heal. If you felt the intensity of this story, if you were touched by the pain and truth it carries, subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the tragedies that history has tried to hide, not to judge, but to understand. Leave your comment. Do you think Maria was a victim of time or the architect of her own ruin? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that power without healing is just another form of destruction.